Hello, Cedar here, and today again I'm gonna be reading another book, another story from the book Tiger Rock, which is The Monty Within, which sounds very abstract if I had to guess. It's gonna be a very interesting story. Hopefully nothing like the mini ballerina incident from another book. I've had enough of that. I really didn't enjoy that story. Anyway, yeah, let's just hope it's all good fun. Maybe it ends a little more or a little less questionable. I don't know. A little more closure on the end compared to Tiger Rock, which just ended without much explanation. Here we'll see something in the epilogue, but I'm not really too sure yet. So, without further ado, I'm just gonna start reading next story. The droning bee let out an ear-stabbing screech and grabbed Kane by the shoulders, hauling him from the sleek sailboat that was cutting through calm blue waters under a dazzling blue sky. Kane thrashed, but the bee hung on its high-pitched keens, drilling through Kane's ears right into his brain. Kane kicked at the bee and fell out of bed. Very dramatic opening, yes? The second, his shoulder impacted the rough grey Berber rug that did little to soften the hardwood floor under it. Kane realized that the bee wasn't a bee at all. It was his alarm clock. Kane groaned and scrambled to his feet, staggering like he had no idea how to use his legs. He stumbled across the room and slammed his palm down on the top of his obnoxious clock radio. What had he been thinking when he put the freaking thing so far away from his bed? Oh yeah, he'd been thinking that if it wasn't all the way over there, he'd hit the snooze button in his sleep and be late for... Kane blinked and looked at the clock's glowing blue numbers. Oh crap! Totally awake now, Kane whirled and made a beeline. Bee? Huh? Get it? Well, for his bathroom. If he didn't get a move on, he'd be late to pick up Sienna. He'd already been late twice this week, which wasn't winning him any happy girlfriend points. Kane turned the chrome knob on the wall of his white-tiled shower. As the water started to spurt, cold and loud, he remembered that he'd promised Archer he'd look over his school project before Archer caught the bus. The night before, while Kane had been hunched over his black metal computer desk, tapping on his laptop keys as he worked on his senior essay draft, his mother had reminded him about his big brother responsibility. Why can't you look at a project? Kane had asked, frowning over a sentence that just wouldn't come out the way he wanted. His mom had sighed so heavily that her spearmint-scented breath had blown Kane's hair down over his forehead. What do you know about baseball? She'd ask. Or science. She'd put a hand on one of Kane's hunched-up shoulders. And besides, it's your opinion that matters most to him. Still concentrating on his essay, Kane had given in. What other choice did he have? Archer, a 13-year-old nerd who not only was small enough to be a kid half that age, but also tended to have the social skills of a much younger boy too, had enough trouble in the world without being neglected by his brother he worshipped. The whole reason Archer had done his science project on the physics of baseball was because Kane was his high school star hitter, getting a full ride to the best universities in the state because of his .352, I'm sorry, I don't know baseball, batting average, and a 1.036 OPS. Wow, those are numbers. Yeah. On top of great hitting, Kane was an outstanding left fielder. He never bragged about it. It was just what it was. His fielding percentage was an impressive .9842. Archer who couldn't have cared less about sports but who loved science and numbers, thought Kane's stats made him some kind of superhero. Steam started pouring out of the shower. Kane adjusted the water's temperature and stepped under the pounding spray. He grabbed his shampoo and started lathering up his hair. The shampoo's coconut scent filled the air. Kane ran through the coming day in his mind. After he looked over Archer's school project and raced over to pick up Sienna to get them to school, he needed to talk to Mr. Rivera, his English teacher, about part of his essay when he had his morning classes. At lunch, Kane hoped to grab some time in the school's wood shop. The year before, he'd signed up for the shop class so he could learn what he needed to know to help his mum with her DIY projects. He'd been surprised when he discovered that he both really liked woodworking and had a talent for it. He was toiling over an extra credit project now that was to double as a surprise for Sienna, and he was grabbing time on it as often as he could. After lunch, he had afternoon classes. When he had baseball practice, then he had baseball practice. Following that, he hoped to grab a couple of hours to work on his essay. And then he had a date he'd promised Sienna. When Kane got home from his date, Archer inevitably would want to hang out before bedtime. Kane rinsed his hair and groaned. "There needs to be two of me," he said out loud. "Oh, it's gonna be this kind of story." His words echoed in the big glass-doored shower stall, and he laughed. This essay thesis was right. There were two of him. The problem was that both Kanes shared one body, and that limited what he could get done in one day. Kane shut off the water and got out of the shower. Drying off as fast as he could, he stepped over to his mirror and wiped away the fog that covered it. Even though he was short on time, he grabbed his hair gel and his dryer. If he had to cram 3 days' worth of stuff into one day, he wasn't going to do it looking like a slob. Kane, who understood that his dark brown eyes, symmetrical features, wide mouth, and strong jaw added up to what Sienna called too handsome for your own good. Though it only made sense to take care of his looks, just because he was super busy didn't mean he couldn't have swag. Kane put his elbows on the shiny red lemonade tabletop of the small corner booth he'd managed to snag, even though the Pizzaplex's main dining room was hopping as usual. LED lights wrapping the booth's purple vinyl seats flickering in constant motion, creating shadows that played over Sienna's freckled face and lit up her intense blue eyes. The table they shared was so tiny that she was only inches away, even though she sat across from him. "So the way I see it," Kane said, continuing on the subject he'd brought up as soon as they'd slid into the booth, "the second person," he curled his fingers into air quotes, "that's inside of us is kind of like our very own Alexa or Siri, a non-sentient intelligence that acts like an on-demand computer, sort of a helper or a file keeper, basically managing our lives and running the show." "You're talking about the left brain," Sienna said, her soft, smooth voice barely audible above the rock music blasting from the overhead speakers and the rowdy conversations and laughter of nearby diners. "Right," Kane said. Sienna raised an already severed arched brow, severely arched brow, not severed. "Thank you. Sorry." Kane laughed. "No, left. You're right. I mean, correct." Sienna laughed her deep, husky laugh. Kane grinned at her. For a moment, he forgot his train of thought. The only thing he could focus on was how he was head over heels for her. As usual, Sienna was looking amazing. Sienna's pale skin almost sparkling in the lights, her dress the color of the tangerines that grew on the tree in his family's backyard. Wasn't fancy, but the way she wore it made Kane feel like he was way underdressed in his jeans and dark green polo shirt. But that was normal. Sienna's idea of casual was several rungs above his. Although Sienna usually let her shoulder-length, strawberry blonde hair hang free, tonight she'd gathered it up in a tousled updo that dangled tendrils down over her high cheekbones. Not usually one for much makeup, she'd have made an exception to the rule tonight. Her deep-set eyelids were painted with dark blue shadow. Her full lips were slick with pale pink gloss. So you think our left brain is like a computer, Sienna said. And that means that the right brain is? She raised both of her long-fingered, short-nailed, painted the same color as her dress tonight, hands, palms up. Our consciousness, Kane supplied. Basically, it's what makes us human. It's our sentient connection with the world and with each other. The gangly, curly-haired server bobbed up to their booth and placed a large pepperoni pizza and a salad on the table. The strong scent of garlic wafting from the glistening red pizza sauce. Oh no. It's not Molly in there, is it? No. Thanks, Kane said. Sienna reached out and snacked a large slice of pizza. Folding the slice in half lengthwise, she blew away steam rising from the hot pepperoni slices and gooey cheese. Then she took a huge bite. Kane grinned. He loved that Sienna ate a lot, and she ate fast. At 5 feet 11 inches tall, Sienna was on the varsity volleyball team. She was also a long-distance runner and seemed to have a hollow leg as a result. Good, Sienna said, after she finished chewing. Thanks for bringing me here tonight. I know you're super busy. Did you think I forgot what today is? Kane asked. Sienna, who'd been about to build another big bite, instead smiled at Kane. Well, you're pretty romantic, but nothing, Kane said. 1 year ago today, we had our first date at the old Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria. Kane nodded and looked around at the Pizzaplex's dining room. This was as close as I could get to recreating that, since the pizzeria shut down. I wonder why. No idea. Sienna smiled and reached out to put a cool hand on Kane's forearm. Her fingers were soft and smooth. Kane reached into his pocket and pulled out a flat, rectangular box wrapped in gold paper. I was going to weigh that until after dinner, he said, as he set it on the table. But I can't. Which part can't wait? Sienna asked, eyeing the box. Your computer part or your sentient part? Kane laughed. I'm not really sure. That's a tough part of my thesis. Because our parts usually work together, it's tough to tell which part is running the show. Sienna snatched up the box. Well, I don't care. Both of my parts want to open this now. Pushing aside her unfinished meal, Sienna tore open a gold paper to reveal a red box. She wadded up the paper and threw it at a Kane. It bounced off his chest and he caught it just before it landed on the pizza. Sienna was equal parts serious and silly. He loved that about her. She opened the box and let out a squeal that turned the heads of nearby diners. She reached into the box and pulled out a sloth-shaped onyx pendant. A sloth-shaped, okay? Hanging from a black stainless steel chain. This is so cool, Sienna breathed. I love it. She half rose and leaned across the table to kiss Kane. He did a discreet fist bump under the hem of the checked tablecloth. Score, he thought. In spite of being pretty much as busy as he was, or maybe because of that, Sienna loved the sloth. She collected them in all sorts of forms: plush, ceramic, stone, wood, whatever she could find. She claimed that everyone needed a sloth day now and then to stay sane. Sienna reached behind her to fasten the necklace. Well, whichever part of you chose this, she said as she fingered the onyx sloth. You did good. Kane finished his senior essay, The AI Within, just in the nick of time. He turned it in an hour before the deadline. Now, all he had to do was rework the essay into the oral report that every senior had to give at the senior thesis assembly the following week. When Kane and his family had moved to town 4 years before, he'd enrolled in his high school. He'd been really scared when he'd found out that the school had a tradition of requiring every senior to write a thesis essay and present it in order to graduate. Kane had spent the better part of his high school years worrying about what he'd write when his senior year came around, and how he'd manage to give a speech about it. Although he had no problem getting up to bat in front of the crowd, he hated having to talk in front of a large group of people. But earlier this year, Kane had started thinking about the brain, about how the two sides were responsible for different aspects of human functioning. He'd asked himself how the two sides worked together when the way they did. Then he began wondering what would happen if they didn't work together. He got so into the subject that all his worry about the essay disappeared. He became excited about the project, and he found he was even kind of looking forward to giving his oral presentation. Which was a good thing, because as busy as he was with baseball and Sienna and Archer, and making sure he finished strong in all his classes, the week between handing in his essay and the week of senior thesis assembly passed in what felt like a nanosecond. Actually, Kane's entire senior year felt like it was a racing past. 1 second, he and Sienna had walked hand in hand down the hall on his first day of the school year, and next, Kane was standing behind the scarred wood podium in the school's ice-sealed, cedar-walled assembly hall. Kane gripped the podium with both hands and looked out at the rows and rows and rows of burgundy velour-covered seats. Every one of them was occupied by kids and teachers. Hundreds of pairs of eyes stared up at him. Kane cleared his throat and said, "Batter up." His audience laughed. Okay, he thought. That was a good start. He exhaled and relaxed. He relaxed his fingers so they weren't trying to bore through the podium's sides. He glanced down at the notes, then realized he didn't really need them. He knew his stuff. So he looked up. His gaze scanned the crowd. He found Sienna, and he spoke directly to her. Kane pointed at himself. "I'm talking to you." He pointed at the audience. "Which part of me is talking to which part of you?" That question is the focus of my essay. Sienna smiled at him. She gave him a slight encouraging nod. Kane took a deep breath. "Okay," he said. "So I won't throw too many dates at you, because Mr. Freeman and Mr. Boyd do enough of that." Kane pointed at the senior class's history teachers. They both smiled. "But I will pitch a couple of dates." Kane said, "Don't worry, there won't be a test on this when I'm done." Kane enjoyed the chuckle that got him. In the late 1700s, Kane said, a guy named Maynard Simon Dupuy said that humankind was Homo duplex, because he thought humans had a double brain with a double mind. Almost a century later, a guy named Arthur Ladbroke, Wigan, took the idea further after he watched the autopsy of a man who was missing one hemisphere of his brain, but could walk and talk and read and write and do everything he did just like a normal man. Kane winked at the audience. He did that before he died, obviously. Another chuckle. "I'm on a roll," Kane thought. Well, it's not a comedy set. Whatever. "If you paid any attention at all in biology," Kane said, "you know that our brains have two hemispheres, cleverly named the left brain and the right brain." More chuckles. But this guy had been living with just half a brain, and according to the people who'd known him, he acted pretty much like any ordinary man. So Wigan concluded that if a guy could function with half a brain, then half the brain could be one whole mind. This meant that those of us who have both brain halves have two minds. He called this the duality of the mind. Kind of mind-blowing, huh? Kane grinned and his audience laughed again. Fast forward to the last century, Kane said. A Nobel Prize-winning neurophysiologist, a neurobiologist, Roger Sperry, did a bunch of split brain studies. Back then, separating the two hemispheres of the brain by cutting through the corpus callosum, the nerve fibers that connected the two sides, was done for medical reasons to treat epilepsy. And Sperry studied how people functioned when their brains were separated. Kane made a face. He studied split brains in cats and monkeys too, but that kind of creeps me out, so I'll stick with what he found in the humans. Another rumble of amusement rippled through the comedy hall, the assembly hall. The study results are really strange to think about. I'll tell you just about a couple of them. So Sperry knew that each side of our brain is responsible for the opposite side of the body. This means that your right brain works with the left eye and vice versa. He designed his experiments so he could monitor what each eye saw, so he could tell what information he was going into the brain. Kane paused. Are you with me? He saw several nods. Okay, he said. So one of the things Sperry did was show words to either the split brain person's right eye or left eye. He found that the only words split brain people could remember were the ones they saw with the right eye, meaning it was the left brain that was remembering the world. The right brain could not. Sperry showed two different objects to a split brain person, one to the left eye only, and one to the right eye only, and then asked them to draw what they saw. The participants could only draw what they saw with the left eye, meaning they processed the image with their right brain. What the right eye only saw, the people couldn't draw, but they could describe it with words. Because this, Sperry realized that the left brain is the part that uses language and speech. The right brain can't, on its own, function in that way. That's really interesting to me. What's really interesting to me is that whatever word or image was shown to the right eye, if it was then shown to the left eye, the person acted like they'd never seen the word or image before. In other words, each side of the brain was acting as an individual unit, and the other side of the brain wasn't aware of what its opposite was doing. This means that when the two sides of the brain can communicate with each other, things done by one side of the brain can be done without the other side of the brain even being aware of it. Wild, huh? Kane saw a lot of nods in his audience. That sounds like a lot of pseudoscience, but I don't know. I'd be careful with that kind of stuff. Sperry did a whole bunch of cool experiments. He continued. Yeah. Experiments. Well, but I won't bore you with them. The important thing about them is that they showed Sperry that people act differently depending on whether their brains were fucking halved or not. Basically, when the brain is separated, people have two different. The brain is separate, people act different. Very interesting. Who could have guessed? Ken looked out at their faces to see if people were zoning out, except for a couple of his teammates who were bent over their phones, probably watching a game. His audience seemed pretty engaged. Okay, Kane said, so I'll tell you about one person who has written about the left brain and right brain stuff. Now I'll tell you about what I think and why. Kane decided the podium made him feel like a stuffy professor, so he stepped out from behind it and just stood at the front of the stage. Seniors were required to dress up for their presentation, so he was wearing a pair of pleat front navy slacks, a burgundy and navy striped shirt, and a navy tie with tiny white baseballs on it. He'd spent extra time on his hair that morning, and he knew he was looking good. But he tried to act like he didn't know it. In 1996, a anatomist, okay, Kane said, Jill Bolt Taylor, who was only 37 years at the time, had a stroke, which means that a blood vessel burst in her brain. In Taylor's case, the vessel was in her left brain. This means that basically her left brain went offline, and what she experienced made it really clear how the right brain acts without the left brain, which in turn makes it clear how the left brain functions. Taylor, by the way, recovered from her stroke. It took eight years. She wrote a book about what she learned about her brain and how it worked. She called My Stroke of Insight. If you ever want to quit messing with your cell phone or stop playing games, it's worth reading. Few kids heckled him from the audience. Kane looked at Sienna. She was smiling. What Taylor experienced, Kane went on, showed Taylor that the brain is connected and all the neurons are functioning the way they should. It makes us feel like we're having just one cohesive experience of the world, but we're not aware that there's a right brain perception and a left brain perception. We don't realize that there are basically two parts of us, but there are. Kane looked out at the audience to see if he still had everyone's attention. Most of the eyes in the auditorium were focused on him. So far, so good. When Taylor's left brain wasn't functioning correctly, she was using her right brain, and she didn't, and not only felt differently, she held herself differently. The way she moved and the expressions on her face were different. For instance, she said that a brow furrow she usually had on her face before the stroke was gone when the left brain was damaged. In other words, when Taylor's left brain was offline, she kind of blissed out. She couldn't do things like talk or function in any sort of get things done way, but she didn't care. She said that when she was functioning with primarily her right brain, she was really happy. What she discovered was that when the left brain was out of the picture, the right brain was super chill. Another round of chuckles. The thing is, Kane said, productive is great and all, but Dr. Taylor's experience showed us that the left brain basically is just a biological AI that's running programs instead of being presented in the world. Can have all kinds of problems. Well, it's not an AI, it's very much an NI, right? Natural intelligence. But whatever. Back to Taylor for a second. She said she noticed that when her left brain was sidelined, she stopped putting herself down and questioning herself. I'm sure you've all heard the term negative self-talk. Several heads nodded. Well, Kane said, I think that self-talk comes from the computer part of ourselves. I mean, think about it. Why do we even talk to ourselves at all if there is just one part of us? Who's talking to who? Kane paused to give himself a few seconds to think about that. So, imagine if the left brain, he said, after his pause, or what I think of as our inner AI, took over completely. The left brain runs programs based on whatever information it has taken in. What if the information that's gotten into your inner computer isn't the best information? What if your storytelling program is running on crap that was put in the system by Edwin? Was put in the system when you were little by people who didn't know what they were talking about. I mean, our parents and teachers try, but they don't get it right all the time. Mr. Freeman, the younger of the senior history teachers, a big, dark-skinned ex-football player with massive shoulders, cupped his hands over his face-trimmed goatee and shouted, "Who says you don't? We don't." He gave Kane a smile when everyone in the assembly hall hooted and laughed. Kane smiled. "Hey, I'm not going to argue with you, Mr. Freeman. I could beat you in a home run derby, but you'd flatten me in any other contest." The audience laughed and even harder. Kane waited for quiet. Then he went on. "My point is, that AI can use what it's given, and without the balancing force of the right hemisphere, it will contort itself all over the place to fit the data it receives into what it understands, even if what it understands is all wrong. Because of this, I think it's very possible that many of the behavioral problems that people have is a result of the biological AI using bad data or data. When the AI has bad data, it can turn into something that is harmful to itself and the system around it. Kane noticed that a few people in the audience had started frowning at him. He shrugged inwardly. He knew this was where he might go in a direction that not everyone could follow. The thing is, he went on, if we could get used to the idea that we have within us two parts that have totally different agendas and functions, we can be more aware when the computer part starts to lead us off a cliff. I mean, since I started working on this paper, I've noticed that sometimes the computer part of me, the part that runs on what I know, really likes to stir up trouble. It can basically be a big drama queen or drama king. He grinned and several people smiled at him. Back to Miss Dr. Taylor at one last time, he said. When she was recovering from her stroke, basically getting her AI within functioning again, she said she realized that the parts of her that were on once she's not in love with, the stubborn, arrogant, and jealous parts, for instance, are in her left brain. Basically, it's the left brain, that computer part, that can make us act like jerks. There is no question that the AI within does a lot of good. It helps us get dressed in the morning and drive without plowing into people most of the time. Another wave of laughter swept through the room. But the AI part of our minds, Kane continued, can also be our worst enemy. My theory is that we all would live better if we had full knowledge of the fact that this is non-sentient and therefore really non-human part of us has a lot of control over what we say and do. Kane returned to the podium and squared himself up behind it. It all comes down to think, beware, just saying. He stepped back and gave a cocky little bow to make it clear he was done. And now comes the moment of truth, Kane thought. As Kane stepped away from the podium, Miss Stockton trotted up onto the stage, her back to the audience. She gave Kane a thumbs up. He relaxed a little. Even though his talk had gone well, he thought this was the part of the process that he'd not allowed himself to think too much about it. After every oral presentation, the audience was given the opportunity to offer comments, which didn't necessarily affect the grade you got, but could be a real ego killer. Kane had seen several of his friends get reamed by their peers. Mr. Stockton patted her tidy, graying page boy haircut and straightened the yellow button-down blouse she wore with a navy blue straight skirt. The audience had started murmuring while Miss Stockton took her place on the stage. She rapped on the podium. Is that a word? Never heard that. She rapped on the podium with large knuckles. The voices quieted. Okay, Miss Stockton said. Let's have a show of hands. Who buys what Kane was selling? Who believes in the AI within? Kane looked out at the audience. He thought had been pretty perceptive to what he was saying. He expected to see a lot of hands, but he didn't. Only a couple dozen hands went up, and those were tentative. Kane forced himself not to slump, but he couldn't contain a sigh of disappointment. His gaze sought Sienna's. Her hand wasn't up. She gave him a sorry look and shrugged. Kane loved that Sienna had her own opinions and didn't just mindlessly go along with him on everything like a lot of his buddies girlfriends did with their boyfriends. But really? Why hadn't she told him before that she didn't believe his story? I think it's all a bunch of crap, someone called out. That was me, actually. I was in that auditorium. Kane squinted and saw that the speaker was Reg, the football team's starting quarterback. Kane thought of Reg as a pretty good friend. "What's that, Reg?" Miss Stockton said. "Stand, please." Reg got on his feet. "Well, it sounds to me like a kind of video games causes society's problems thing." Kane frowned and made a face. "What? What is that?" "You hadn't even mentioned video games." "Go on," Miss Stockton said. Completely unrelated, but go on." "Well," Rex said, running a hand over his dark brown buzz cut, "you seem to be saying that what we're exposed to is what goes in this computer in our brain, and that's what messes us up. It's the same thing that people say about video games." "I'm sure it's the same thing, it's just different." "Same thing." One of the cheerleaders, Candy, stood. Her blonde ponytail bounced as she nodded. "I agree with Reg," she said. "I mean, Kane was really funny and interesting, and I think he should get a good grade because he obviously did a lot of research and stuff. But it doesn't make sense to me that there's some computer in our head that makes us do bad stuff." "Oh man, she's oversimplifying," Kane thought. Or had he just not explained himself well enough? No, I don't think they listened, sir. For the next few minutes, while others weighed in with similar comments, Kane told himself that his hurt feelings were just his computer reacting from old programs. He looked out at Sienna and watched her toy with her new Slav pendant that made him feel good. So he did the best to tune out the rest. Once the essay assembly was over, there were only 6 weeks left until graduation. Kane was relieved that the heavy work of his essay was done, but that didn't mean that things had lightened up much. He still had baseball practice and games. He still had exams to study for, and he still had Sienna. Kane and Sienna weren't going to be at the same college come fall, and he wanted to spend as much time with her as he could before they separated. They decided they were going to try a long-distance relationship, but Kane wasn't sure how that was going to work out. All of this was why Kane had to work to suppress a groan when Archer started bugging Kane to take him to the Freddy Fazbear Mega Pizzaplex. "But Arch," Kane said. "Oh, no, that's Kane." "But Arch," Kane said when Archer brought up the evening of the essay assembly. We've done everything there is to do in that place. Aren't you bored with it by now?" "Nuh-uh," Archer said, as he took a big bite of the tacos Kane had made them for dinner. Kane and Archer sat outside at the wrought iron table on the edge of their yard's cedar deck. Yes, Kane didn't much like the table because silverware liked to fall through the tabletop's fancy curlicue design, but at least his mom had gotten comfortable cushions for the table's matching chairs. The cushions were bright yellow and red striped, and they reminded Kane a little bit of a circus, and also of the Pizzaplex, actually. Oh, circus? Circus Baby's Pizza World? Maybe that's a reference, who knows. The evening was warm and still. It was so quiet in the backyard. Kane could hear a bee buzzing around his mom's red geraniums. It's actually just your alarm clock. Archer wiped his wide mouth. "Want to play air hockey?" he said. He took another bite of taco and started talking about air hockey strategies, with his mouth full. "So can we?" Archer asked, shoving more taco in his mouth. "Play air hockey?" Kane blinked and realized his inner AI had shanghaied his thoughts. I didn't know that's a verb. He returned to the present. "Why can't Miles go with you?" Kane asked. Miles was Archer's one and only friend. It killed Kane that his little brother couldn't seem to make more friends. Archer and Miles got picked on at school all the time. Kane bit into his own taco. It was a little heavy on the cilantro, but otherwise it wasn't bad. Kane's dad had left 5 years ago. He was a doctor and he'd fallen for his office nurse. Kane hadn't forgiven his dad yet for leaving Kane's mum. His dad was a jerk. His mum ran her own interior design company, but now she worked long hours and Kane and Archer were on their own a lot, so Kane had taught himself to cook. He thought he was getting pretty good at it, too much cilantro aside. Miles went camping with his dad and his little sister, Archer said, still crunching his taco. He looked up at Kane and grinned, his teeth stained with taco seasoning, salsa smeared over his chin. He wiped at it just before some dripping onto the oversized pale blue shirt he wore with baggy jeans. Please, Kane, could we go? We could go after dinner. Kane took another bite, inhaling the sharp scent of the lime he'd added to the meat. It was a good touch, he thought. Well, Kane is certainly not missing an ego. Oh, that's good. I think I am seeing where the story is going. Right. Please, Archer repeated. Kane sighed. He planned on taking Sienna to a movie, but she'd understand if he cancelled. She had a little sister. She knew how it went. Okay, he said, let's do it. Yay! Archer shouted, spewing taco shell bits all over the black wrought iron curlicues. There was so much air hockey a guy could take. After 7 games, Kane's wrist was getting tired, and his brain, left or right, he wasn't sure, but tired of listening to the puck clatter into the goal. He was also getting a headache from the blinking lights and the sips and zaps, sips and zings and pings and gongs that all the other games emitted in a jumble of sounds. Let's go get an ice cream cone, Kane said to Archer. Archer, who'd been about to start another game, shoved his tokens into his pocket. Okay. Kane had been pretty sure that would work. Archer loved ice cream. Kane and his brother wove their way through the other games. They passed the rows of pinball machines, the racing games, and baseball toss, the shoot-'em-up games. Kane passed a life-size plastic version of Roxanne Wolf as he brushed by one of the racing games. He turned the corner to head towards the arched opening to the arcade, but a flashing orange neon sign brought him to a stop. The sign read, "Groundbreaking technology allows you to be your own partner." Kane lifted his gaze to the LED lights flashing above the sign. The lights surrounded a flaming orange arcade game front. Curious, Kane caught Archer's sleeve. Kane pulled Archer towards the machine. Where are we going? Archer asked. Kane pointed to at the new game. It was called Fastcade Tag Team. I want to check this out, Kane said. Archer squinted at the game's sign. A new game. Cool. Okay. They walked over to the entrance of the cave-like enclosure that housed 8 easy chair-like orange vinyl seats, each paired with a fancy bright yellow joystick. The seats sat in a semicircle in front of a massive, maybe 18 feet by 12 feet concave screen that made up the cave's far wall. The screen's clarity was so amazing that it could have been a window offering a view of a great cafeteria in which a rowdy food fight between Fazbear Entertainment animatronic characters was going on. But of course, neither the cafeteria nor the food was real. Kane and Archer stepped through the overhang of the cave's entrance and turned to look at the machine's instruction book. Archer read the glowing neon green words out loud. Are you ready
For a few food fight, you and your buddies can team up against another group of players on the top side of the Pizzaplex. Pick your favorite animatronic partner and fight alongside them. How it works, your favorite Fazbear animatronic can sync with your mind. Control them with your thoughts and intentions.
Archer looked up at Kane and tugged on Kane's sleeve. Never been in a food fight, he said. Kane hadn't either, but he didn't think he'd missed anything. But what intrigued him about the game was the idea of working with an AI partner that had followed his instruction. It was like a game version of what his essay had been about. He thought it would be a fun way of acting out his theories. Okay, Kane said to Archer. Let's try it out. 4 of the 8 seats in the game were occupied. Kane pointed to 2 empty seats on the far left. Archer grinned and dashed to claim the one on the end. As Kane settled into the super comfortable seat, thinking he should get one for his dorm room, Archer fed tokens into the machine. Archer leaned forward and squinted at the small control panel beyond his joystick. It looked like we get to choose which animatronic we want to be, and then we're assigned a partner. Archer tapped on this control panel, and purple blue animatronic bunny wearing a red bow tie appeared on the big screen. It stood at the edge of the cafeteria, away from the food fight action. I'm Bunny, Archer said. What do you want to be? Kane shrugged. He didn't really care. He just wanted to see how the game worked. Come on, Archer urged. Pick one. Okay, Kane said. Orville the elephant was one of the not as well-known Fazbear Entertainment characters. He was in the Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria simulator game. And you see it. Archer giggled as he tapped the keys. You're big enough to be an elephant, he told Kane. Kane lifted one arm up in front of his nose and flipped it as if it was a trunk. He made what he thought was a passable elephant trumpeting sound, which earned him a glare from the black-haired girl sitting next to him. He smiled at her, but his charms didn't get past her heavy goth look makeup and multiple nose and eyebrow rings. Kane returned his attention to the screen. Now standing next to Archer's Bonnie was an orange animatronic elephant. The elephant wore a purple top hat and had 2 black buttons and a purple petaled flower on his chest. Looks just like you, Archer said. He snorted and laughed loudly. Kane grinned and reached for the yellow joystick in front of him. He tested the joystick's maneuverability, and once he had the hang of it, he had Orville pick up a bowl of Jelly-O from the array of food on the cafeteria's buffet line. Orville tossed it at Bonnie. Hey, Archer said, quickly using his joystick so Bonnie could jump out of the way. I'm on your team. Oops, Kane said. He grinned when Archer elbowed him. Kane looked at the screen and noticed that Bonnie was now accompanied by a Fazbear character, Glamrock Chica, a perky white chick in pink and purple leotard. Orville had been joined by Montgomery Gator, a green alligator with a yellow belly, literally not figuratively. Kane hoped. He didn't want to go into a food fight with a cowardly gator at his side. Monty had a red mohawk, and he wore a pair of star-shaped sunglasses, usually suited up in purple and green armor. This version of Monty had a purple chef's apron. Kane was familiar with the Monty's character. The gator in Pizzaplex shows was the animatronic band's bassist. He was jolly, mischievous, and the most aggressive of the Fazbear glam rock characters. Monty was often roaring and destroying things. He was also pretty egotistical. When he was defeated in a game, he was known to say,
"How can I lose? I'm so handsome."
As a partner in a food fight, Kane figured Monty would be pretty effective. "Are you ready?" Archers asked. "I'm going in." Kane watched Bonnie and Glamrock Chico charge into the food fight fray. Kane gripped his joystick, and he and Monty hurled forward. The food fight on the screen had obviously been ongoing for some time, and what had originally been a white-walled and black and white tiled floor cafeteria was now plastered with food in nearly every color imaginable. A couple dozen animatronic characters were dodging and weaving between overturned tables and scattered chairs, and another dozen were loading up on food ammo from the buffet line. Kane decided arming Orville with the optimal first move, so doing his best to avoid being pelted by a flying spaghetti and sloshed by spurts of white chocolate, thick chocolate milkshake, he had Orville make a beeline for another beat. The alarm won't leave you alone. Maybe he's just dreaming all of it. For the rows of food. Monty moved in tandem with Orville, as if with one mind. As they moved on screen, all the characters shouted good-natured threats and let out exclamations of defeat or triumph, depending on the situation. As Monty and Orville headed towards the food, Monty sang out,
"Party time!"
Kane grinned as Orville trumpeted, "Let's do this!" And Monty responded with,
"Let's have some fun!"
At the buffet line, Monty split off from Orville.
"Rock and roll!"
Monty thundered as he ran. Kane manipulated his joystick so that Orville headed for the fruit bowl at the end of the row. Monty went the other way and snatched up a platter of cupcakes and darted into the fray. Other characters scattered as Monty cried,
"Run, run, run!"
Great voice. I don't think I can keep that up. Monty's voice was an amusing mix of mischievous teasing and gravelly bass threat. Kane left his partner to his cupcake barrage and let himself get totally caught up in the game. He had surprisingly good time, leaping, diving, and rolling the same way he did in the outfield. Kane discovered he was sort of a food fight phenom. Within minutes of joining in the chaotic mess in the virtual cafeteria, Orville had kicked some serious food fight butt. Kane watched the other players. He picked up on their evasive move. As a result, Orville's orange body got a little stained, but he didn't look as messy as most of the other player characters did. Kane was so caught up in what Orville was doing in the game that he didn't pay much attention to his alligator partner at first, other than trying to protect Monty from the opposite team, trying to squirm the gator with ketchup or pummel him with bread rolls. Because the game didn't provide a method of direct communication between team members, Kane figured the best way he could do was have Monty's back, and he hoped Monty would have his. As the game progressed, though, Kane started to notice that Monty, instead of doing his own thing, as Orville was doing, was for the most part mimicking Orville's, or i.e. Kane's, moves. Once he realized what was going on, Kane started studying Monty, and sure enough, he saw that Monty was not only using moves that were nearly identical to those of other players, but he was also using some of Orville's under Kane's direction moves, too. Monty began to use both the unique skills that Kane had brought to the game from his baseball experience and also the new skills that Kane had learned as he played. Interesting, Kane thought. How did that work? Kane moved Orville to a sheltered position behind one of the cafeteria counters. When Kane took his hand off the joystick and stretched his fingers, he rolled his head on his neck, something he often did on the baseball diamond to make sure he was loose and dialed in to what was going on around him. As his head rotated up, Kane's gaze landed on the game's cave ceiling, and he noticed a glowing circle, about a foot in diameter, above his head. What was that?
Get in the game,
Monty's deep voice called out. Kane refocused on the screen. Glamrock Freddy was trying to sneak up on Orville with a big bowl of oatmeal. Oh no. Oh no, you don't, Kane said. On the screen, Orville catapulted from behind the counter and leaped over Freddy. Orville's stumpy elephant legs kicked the oatmeal out of Freddy's grasp, and then the elephant used his more than would have been normal for an elephant dexterity to snatch the bowl away from the animatronic bear. He dumped the oatmeal on Freddy's head and then scampered off to rearm himself with more fruit. As Orville went in the direction of the fruit bowl, Kane noticed that Monty was running alongside Orville. Kane had sent Orville the long way around a tangle of overturned chairs as he did. He pondered his next couple of moves. How much fruit should he have Orville try to carry? Should Orville attack or evade next? Kane was concentrating hard on his strategy, so at first he didn't notice that Monty was doing. But when he saw that Monty had gone still, as if frozen on screen, that's weird, Kane thought. But then a Roxanne wolf came up behind him with a sloppy bowl of guacamole. Her partner, the pirate fox, Foxy, flanked her. He was carrying a big basket of tortilla chips. Kane stopped planning. He moved the joystick and sent Orville into action. On the screen, Orville dove behind a tangle of chairs and held one up to the block of chips that were directly his way. Next to him, Monty roared fiercely, was back in motion again. Monty shouted,
"You're in trouble now,"
as he snatched up a platter from the floor, using the platter as a shield. Monty advanced on Foxy and lobbed a bowl of pudding at the fox's head.
"Fast and loose,"
Monty bade. With a rumbling growl, Monty did a little victory dance.
"I'm the man,"
crowed. For the next several minutes, Kane's attention was split. So was his mind. Probably. Part of him was playing the game, but part of him was analyzing Monty's behavior. It was really intriguing. As he played and observed, Kane began to see that whenever he concentrated on Orville's action, trying to plan out his moves and get all strategic about them, Monty would go still, as if glitching. When Kane took his hand off the joystick and let Orville go idle, Monty would move freely, mimicking Kane's gameplay. It was like Monty was connected to Kane somehow, even when Kane wasn't using the game control. As he played, Kane frequently glanced up at the glowing golden circle above his head. The light was pulsing a little. Its movement was barely noticeable, but the longer Kane paid attention to it, he realized its fluttering rhythm was irregular. The light shimmer reminded Kane of the often sporadic oscillations of brainwaves. Kane frowned. On the screen in front of him, Orville rotated to look at Monty, who again turned to stone. Kane let go of his joystick and craned his neck to look up at the light above his head. What was that thing? Kane felt the muscles in his shoulders tighten as a radical thought popped in his head. He tried to dismiss the thought, but it didn't go away. It reviewed what he'd observed in his game. He replayed Monty's moves in his head. He frowned. What if he was right? Kane felt a tug on the sleeve of his t-shirt. He blinked and looked to his left. Archer. He'd forgotten all about Archer. Our time's up, Archer said. I'm ready for ice cream, okay? Distracted by his thoughts, Kane nodded. Archer jumped up, and that was fun, Archer said. Kane nodded again as he rose from his seat. He looked up at the circle above his head. Its light was dimmer now, and it was still. Had it been doing what he thought it was been doing? Archer, chattering about throwing french fries and getting hit by hamburger patties, led the way out of the Fastcade tag team cave. Kane followed him, but he couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. However strange it might have sounded if he had said it out loud, Kane was convinced that the Fastcade tag team game somehow took advantage of the very ideas Kane had researched for his essay. He was sure the game had somehow used his biological AI during the game. The way Monty had behaved really seemed like the game had been hijacking part of Kane's mind. The entire next day, Kane was distracted by the food fight game. His obsession with it made him miss a good half of what he heard in his classes and caused him to make 2 stupid errors during baseball practice. At least it was practice and not a game. When Sienna lit into him for not listening to her when she tried to talk to him about a problem that she was having with one of her volleyball teammates, Kane realized he had to solve the mental puzzle that was consuming him. He had to go back to the Pizzaplex and check out the game again. He had to test out his theory. Because Miles and his dad and sister had come back early from their camping trip, something about Miles falling into a bed of poison ivy. Imagine that's not nice. Archer was occupied for the evening. He'd gone over to his friend's house to play Monopoly to attempt to distract Miles from all the itching. Yeah, I can only imagine how that feels. Kane didn't have to worry about Sienna either. She was annoyed enough with Kane to want a solo Slav evening with all her Slavs, instead of a date. He was free to head back to the Pizzaplex to do a little recon on the food fight machine. Feeling a little silly walking into the Pizzaplex arcade on his own, Kane did his best to stroll nonchalantly, as if he was just a cool senior with a little time to kill. Kane wasn't obsessed with his image like some of the other jocks he knew, but he didn't want to look like a friendless nerd, although that thought felt really disloyal to Archer. How could he love his brother and judge nerds at the same time? Because of the AI within. When Kane ducked into the Fastcade tag team player cave, the rest of the arcade sounds diminished a little. He hadn't noticed that last night, but then last night he hadn't been on a mission to figure out something. A mission that made him wish he could get some silence so he could focus and think. Only 3 of the game's orange chairs were occupied, so Kane was able to sit on the end. Not only was it important he sat somewhere else to test his hypothesis, but he was happy for the bit of distance from the 3 other players. One of them, or maybe all of them, didn't smell so good. The smell was a cross between dirty socks and sweat. These were odors Kane was pretty used to. His team's locker room wasn't exactly an olfactory paradise. But that didn't mean he liked them. He started breathing through his mouth as he settled himself in the chair. Inserting tokens into the machine, Kane leaned forward and studied the control panel. The night before, Archer, who was an arcade game whiz, had called up their personas for the game. Kane had to concentrate to pick Orville again. He wanted to be the same player so he could try to recreate some of the things he'd observed the night before. Kane managed to choose Orville, but as the orange elephant popped into view on the curved screen, Kane suddenly realized he'd have no control over what partner he got. What if... he needn't have worried. Montgomery Gator walked up next to Orville and held out a black-gloved hand for a high five. Kane tried not to be too freaked out by Monty's obvious recognition of Kane, aka Orville. He used the joystick so Orville could return the high five. Kane looked up at the golden circle above his head. It was bright again, the same way it had been during the game the night before. Okay, Kane muttered. Let's see what happens. For the next 10 minutes, Kane blocked out everything except the food fight playing out on screen in front of him. While at once doing his best to avoid getting bombarded by food and attempting to score points with well-aimed attacks of his own, peaches and plums were his ammo of choice tonight, Kane carefully observed Monty's behavior in relation to Kane's strategy and Orville's resulting moves. As had happened the night before, Monty tended to freeze up whenever Kane was overanalyzing, and Monty was in the flow when Kane was. Kane took his hand off the joystick and looked up. The circle of light above his head was flickering just a little. If Kane hadn't been looking for the slight variations in brightness, he didn't think he would have seen them, but they were there. The light was linked to something that was in turn linked to the game, and very probably to Kane. But how did it work? Kane had to know. Kane jumped to his feet. He looked up at the light, which was blinking, and was still blinking. Were the movements coordinated with Kane's brain waves, as he suspected? And how had Fazbear synced up to his mind? Kane climbed onto the orange vinyl chair and touched the circle of light. What had looked like a glow of light from below was clearly a circular, heavy plastic panel, was covering whatever was the source of the light. Kane tightened his grip on the panel and attempted to shift it. When gently shoving the panel didn't do more than wiggle it, he clamped his teeth together the way he did when he was concentrating on catching a long ball trying to clear the fence, made a fist, and pounded on the cover. Sparks shot down from the edges of the plastic like a meteor shower. Kane ducked his head as he heard sizzles around him, and the food fight game screen went dark. So did all the lights in the game. Even though the Fazcade tag team game was mostly in its own cave, plenty of light spilled in from the rest of the dazzling arcade. Kane therefore was able to clearly see all three little boys in the other vinyl seats look up at him and scowl. "Hey," spiky-haired kid said. "What'd you do?" One of the other kids, a blond boy with long hair that flopped over, pale blue eyes, pointed at Kane. "You broke the game," the boy yelled. "Yeah," the third kid, who had the hair even yellower than his floppy-haired body, chimed in. The gap between his front teeth was obvious when he pulled back his lips and shouted as he pointed at Kane. "It was him! He did it!" Chagrined, Kane jumped off the vinyl seat. He wasn't going to find out anything else tonight. He turned to leave the arcade. As Kane approached the game's cave entrance, with the boys still shouting accusations behind him, the curly brown-haired attendant stepped around the corner of one of the pinball machines. He looked past Kane and saw the darkened screen. Then she shifted her attention to the boys, who were still pointing and screaming at Kane. The girl frowned at Kane and pressed her lips together. Before she could say anything to him, he gave her a short nod and strode away from the food fight game. That's fun. Just give a nod. Yeah, I broke it. Yeah, it was me. I'll be going now. Tucking his chin, the same way he did after he missed a catch in a game, he kept his eyes on the arcade's bright red carpet as he got out of there as quickly as he could. Kane returned home from the Pizzaplex just before his mom got home from work. The phone rang as they both walked into the kitchen. His mom picked up the phone from the white marble counter near the stainless steel fridge. Kane, still preoccupied with the arcade, didn't pay attention to what his mom was saying until she put down the phone and turned towards him. "Archer is staying over at Miles' house," she said. "Apparently Archer is doing a good job of distracting Miles with his misery." She dropped her massive top purse onto the kitchen island and plunked herself down on one of the dusty blue plush stools. Kane took the stool next to his mom's. He noticed that the pale yellow linen pantsuit she'd put on that morning was just as fresh and unwrinkled now, 12 hours later, as it had been then. She looked just as perky, too. What'd she do that? Kane ran a hand through his hair, which had felt limp. That was how he felt, too. He couldn't seem to shake off what had happened at the arcade. Kane's mom stood and went to the fridge. Pulling out a bottled protein drink, she opened it and took a big swig. As she turned back to Kane, I assume you and Sienna went out? You ate? Kane shook his head. Yes, he said. Liar, liar, put your pants on fire. He blinked. Where in the heck did that come from? He never called himself that before. He'd also never thought in that taunting tone. And besides, he wasn't lying. He'd answered the question about eating, and he had eaten. He'd stopped by the corner deli and grabbed a turkey sandwich on his way home from the Pizzaplex. But he didn't go on a date, he thought. Half lie, half lie, half lie. Kane frowned, reacting to his teasing self-talk. He clarified. I mean, yes, I ate, but no, Sienna and I didn't go out. She wanted a sloth evening. Kane's mom smiled. I could use one of those, his mom said after she swallowed more of her drink. But I guess I'll settle for a long bath. She looked at Kane. Are you okay? You look a little... He frowned and studied him. Stressed, I guess. You have some tightness under your eyes there. Kane shook his head. I'm okay. Just thinking about all the stuff I need to get done. You're full of it, he thought, rattled and tired. Kane stood and prepared to tell his mom that he was going to turn in early. Instead, he heard himself say, I'm going out for a run. Okay, hon, his mom said. Be careful. Be sure you wear that reflective vest. She smiled at him when he rolled his eyes, and then she finished her protein drink, tossed the bottle in the trash. I'm going to turn in after my bath. I'll see you in the morning. Kane's mom stood on her tiptoes. She leaned down for a peck on the cheek. When his mom walked out of the room, Kane didn't move. He wasn't sure what to do next. He didn't want to go for a run. Why had he said he was going to go for a run? Run, 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 he thought. For a strange second, Kane felt like doing a little jitterbug step. Then the urge passed. He walked out of the kitchen and started towards the stairs leading up to the second floor of the house. Because interior design was his mom's business, her own home had to look magazine spread worthy, or so she said. As a result, Kane was used to living in a house that was filled with design trends that popped. The almost black-stained walnut floor, the gray silk wallpaper walls, the chrome accents in the living room, filled with linen-covered plush furniture, and the modern art and sculpture strategically placed throughout the main living area were not what he'd call comfy and inviting, but apparently they were chic. Party time, Kane thought as he bounded up the stairs. What? Party time. Okay. Kane noticed the way he was moving and wondered why he was doing it. He also had the sudden urge to grab one of the framed modern art prints from the wall and throw it down onto the foyer. What was wrong with him? Kane suppressed the bizarre, destructive urge. He bolted into the bedroom where his mom's interior design efforts did not intrude, and he shut the door. Looking at the room that was familiar to him as his own skin, Kane thought, for the first time ever, what's with all the gray in here? I like gray, Kane said out loud. Kane walked to his queen-sized bed and flopped down on it. Stretching out, he gazed around his room. Lots of gray, he thought, as his gaze circled the large room. Boring. The words stretched out in his head. Boring. I like gray, Kane repeated as if reassuring himself. He liked black too. Black and silver were the colors of his favorite Major League Baseball team. Admittedly, Kane had been Archer's age when he'd picked out the gray paints for his walls, along with the black painted shaker style headboard and matching dresser, nightstand, chest of drawers, and metal credenza style desk. At the time, he'd also picked posters of his favorite baseball players for his walls. He'd since outgrown those and replaced them with a couple of framed sketches of baseball diamonds and even more framed photos of Sienna, his friends, and Archer. Most of the room was like a pictorial of his high school years. Boring, Kane thought again. Kane screwed up his face and rubbed his temples. It was boring. Why did he think that? Unlike a lot of kids, Kane had enjoyed high school. Sure, it helped that he was one of the sports stars in his class, but he liked learning too. It had been his idea, for instance, to tackle the subject of his essay. His friends had all picked sports topics, but Kane had thought the workings of the left and right brain were really fascinating, and he'd been happy to do the research. Fascinating like a word, Kane thought. Okay, that's enough, Kane snapped. He sat up and grabbed his head. What was going on with him? It was like someone else was thinking the thoughts in his head. Kane shot to his feet and ran to the bathroom. He stared into the oval mirror above his gray, rectangular sink. He looked at himself in the mirror. Other than the fact that his carefully created blowout hairstyle had gone limp sometime during the evening at the arcade, Kane looked the same as he always did, didn't he? Kane leaned towards the mirror. He squinted at himself, and as he did, he saw the tightness under his eyes that his mom had mentioned. He also saw something else, a kind of smart Alec glint in his in his eyes, as if he was looking back at himself, condescending and critical amusement. While Kane was gazing into the brown eyes that, for some reason, had a bit more gold in them than he remembered, he suddenly winked at himself. The wink sent him stumbling back from the sink. I did not just wink at myself, Kane said out loud. His words seemed to bounce off the bathroom's grey travertine-tilled walls and come back at him. Yep, you did, Kane thought. I'm just tired, Kane said to himself. Yeah, that's it, sport, he thought. Lie, lie, lie. Kane clamped his hands over his ears, shaking his head. He grabbed his toothbrush from its black holder by the sink. Wah, wah, baby needs to go beddy bye, he thought as he vigorously brushed his teeth. Kane did his best to blank out his mind as he finished with his teeth and headed to bed. When he again thought, run, 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 he started listing Major League Baseball players and the stats in his head. After just a couple of dozen of them, he drifted off to sleep. The next day was a Friday. Kane was happy about that. Getting through the school day had been brutal. The bizarre thoughts wouldn't stop popping into his head. It seemed like everything he saw triggered some new judgment that he'd never been made before. Felt like he was losing his mind. Although, well, he already lost it, right? Although he hadn't felt like himself all day. Well, he lost half of it, right? It wasn't until the end of the day, until the end of his date with Sienna, that he'd faced what was going on with him. After grabbing a chicken burrito at a newsstand at the weekend farmers market, Kane and Sienna had strolled through the market hand in hand, as they often did. The market was like an upscale, grown-up version of the Pizzaplex arcade. Nearly everyone who came to the market was in a good mood. Happy chatter, laughter, and a dozen of mouth-watering food aromas were a backdrop for checking out displays of local produce, artisan goods, and nearly every art and craft you could think of. Kane didn't enjoy poking around all the displays as much as Sienna did, but he loved being with Sienna, so he never complained about their farmer's market state. When Sienna spotted something that she liked, generally something really inexpensive, he'd buy it for her. She loved that. You're so romantic, she told him hundreds of times. Tonight, Sienna was a little off. She had a pimple on the end of her nose. She was self-conscious about it. It was there when I woke up this morning, she said to him. When he picked her up before school, don't look at it.
Can't take my eyes off it, he thought, chuckling inwardly. It's bigger than Chica's cupcake.
Shocked not only by the unkind thought, but also by a comparison to a Fazbear character, Kane had wisely said, it's not noticeable. And even if it was, your beauty trumps it. Sienna had smiled and given Kane a kiss as he had listened to a long snort in his head. Fast and loose, he thought. What a line. Kane had frowned. It wasn't a line. He really thought Sienna was beautiful. And what did fast and loose mean anyway? Hey, look at these, Sienna said now, tugging on Kane's arm. She led him towards a kiosk that sold miniature animals made out of seashells. They're so clever, she said as she scanned the shelves. She flashed a smile at the elderly woman who sat on the black canvas director's chair near the stuff she had for sale. The thin, gray-haired lady smiled back at Sienna and winked at Kane. Sienna plucked one of the little shell animals off its shelf. It's a sloth, she squealed and clearly delighted. Kane glanced at the sign that listed the prices of the animals. The little sloth was only $6. You could buy that for her. Kane started to reach for the sloth. Before his hand got to it, though, for some reason, he turned. His gaze landed on a kiosk that sold natural skin products, made from honey and oats, and a lot of love, the kiosk sign read. Kane, wanting very much to take the sloth from Sienna's hand and buy it, instead nudged Sienna, pointed at the skincare kiosk. You should put back the sloth, he said. Let's go over there and I'll buy you something for the big zit on your nose. Oh boy.
I'm the man, Kane thought.
He had a strong urge to grin and do a fist pump.
I'm a hoot, he told himself.
But what he'd said wasn't funny. It was childish and mean. What'd he say? Why had he said it? Sienna, her face flushed and her eyes narrowed into slits, put her back to Kane. Without saying a word to him, she pulled out some money and bought herself the sloth. Then she thanked the old lady and marched away from the kiosk without even glancing at Kane. That was a bonehead move, young man, the old woman said. Kane heard a roar in his head.
Sticks and stones, he thought.
And that was when he realized he had to accept the truth. But not now. First, he had to make up with Sienna. Kane had took off after Sienna. He had to practically run to catch up with her because she was striding quickly through the farmer's market. Sienna, he called out, I'm sorry, I don't know what got into me. But the thing was that he did know. He absolutely knew. Unfortunately, though, there was just no way he was going to be able to explain it to her. It was too incredible. Get away from me, Sienna flung Kane when he came up beside her and tried to take her arm. She shook off his head. And I'm really sorry, Kane tried again. Forget it, Sienna said. You're right, my sit is huge, so I think I'll just make a sit home and spend the evening with it. It's massive, but it's a lot nicer than you are. Sienna broke into a trot and started jogging away from Kane. He followed her. Let me drive you home, he called. I'd rather get a ride by a serial killer. She shouted. Several couples turned and looked at Sienna. She ignored them. The couples were looking at Kane too. He might as well have had a neon sign over his head that read, Stupid boyfriend. Not stupid, Kane growled in his head. What would have been stupid was buying the dumb sloth. The skin cream thing was rock and roll. At this point, even if he could have convinced Sienna to get in his car with him, Kane wouldn't have driven her home. He couldn't be with her right now. He was too mind blown. Or actually, he was mind possessed. That was what was going on. He understood now. It had happened at the Pizzaplex in the food fight game cave. Like any normal human, Kane had a voice in his head. He had one for as long as he could remember. The voice chattered at him about what he needed to do, how he could do better, how he should have done that and shouldn't have done the other thing. The voice made projections about the future. It worried and fretted. It also schemed and complained. It compared and it assessed. Kane's voice, like all inner voices, was a very busy voice. It rarely shut up. The voice, the left brain aspect of Kane, that had motivated him to learn about the way the brain worked, was Kane's AI computer self. And Kane was used to the voice. He knew how to use it for his own good, and he knew how to ignore it when necessary. He also was familiar with the tone of his inner voice. He knew what he sounded like in his head. So Kane knew that he was hearing a new voice in his head. His voice was still there some of the time, but another voice had joined in. Kane knew who that new voice belonged to. As strange as it sounded, Kane was sure that the new voice in his head belonged to Montgomery Gator. Monty's AI, via the food fight game at the pizzeria, had somehow gotten into Kane's neurocircuitry when they played the game when they were playing the game, and it wasn't leaving. Monty was now a resident in Kane's head. He just hoped he wouldn't be a permanent one. All the strange thoughts Kane's had been having since the night before, all the snarky little judgments that had been running through his mind, these weren't his own. The thoughts sounded just like things Monty had said in the game. Obviously, the thoughts belonged to Monty. It had been Monty who had suggested skin cream instead of a sloth made of shells. Crocs eat sloths for snacks, Kane thought. Shut up, he murmured, and he groaned. How was he going to live with not one but two AI voices in his head? Somehow, even as he wrestled with what was happening to him, Kane managed to get to sleep that night. He managed to haul himself out of the bed the next morning, having breakfast with his mom, hang out with Archer. After Archer got home from Miles' house, Kane even got to school on time to catch the team bus to Saturday afternoon's game. Several times during the ride, he tried to call Sienna, but she wasn't taking his calls. He didn't blame her, but he kept trying. After he and his teammates trooped aboard the old team bus, which belched the sharp odor of diesel fuel as its engine surged, and the bus jolted into motion. Kane took out his phone again. He tapped Sienna's number on his screen. Leaning against the bus' cool window and turning a little to try for some privacy, Kane waited for Sienna to answer. But she didn't. So what? Kane thought, after he'd left his 10th message wondering if he still had a girlfriend. Who needs a girlfriend? I do, Kane said loudly. Yeah, well, I didn't propose, dude, Kane's buddy Lewis said. Kane elbowed Lewis and tried to look relaxed. I'd accept Frank's proposal before I'd accept yours, Kane said, gesturing at the burly bus driver. Frank glanced over his shoulder. I ain't asking either, Frank called out. Kane laughed. His laugh, however, was more than a little strained. Kane had to stop arguing with himself. Whatever Monty said in Kane's head, Kane needed to keep his mouth shut. He succeeded for the remainder of the bus ride. Once the game began, luckily, Kane's thoughts were only on the game. There was no room for Monty or in Kane's concentration. By the top of the 9th inning, Kane had scored 4 runs. Unfortunately, his teammates weren't doing so well, and the other team was up by 1. Kane came up to bat with 2 outs. It was up to him. If he didn't get a hit, they'd lose. As he always did, when he was preparing to take the plate, Kane took a deep breath to block out the fan noise, both the jeers and the yells of encouragement. He didn't split his attention between what he had to do and what he was hearing. As part of his pre-batting ritual, Kane took exactly seven practice swings on deck. He scuffed one foot in the dirt and then the other. Dust wafted up around his ankles. He wagged his bat. He tapped home plate with the end of the bat twice. Then he faced the pitcher. The other team's pitcher was a short guy, but he had the power. He also had an evil knuckleball. Knuckleballs were rare pitches, especially in high school baseball, and the pitchers who used them tended to use them almost exclusively. This guy, though, a beaky-nosed guy with heavy freckles and dark, almost black eyes, only used knuckleballs sporadically. Mostly, he brought the heat, which was good because Kane could power through fastballs. Kane, however, missed the pitcher's first two fastballs. He thought they were outside the strike zone. The umph, who emphatically called both pitches strikes, disagreed. Oh, the UMP? Is that like the what do you call it, the referee, I guess? When Kane squared up to bat after his two strikes, the afternoon breeze carried the smell of hot dogs and popcorn and the scent of freshly mowed grass from the outfield across the plate. On the heels of the aromas, Kane looked into the pitcher's eyes. He knew without a doubt that the guy was going to throw a knuckleball. Because Kane liked being a well-rounded hitter, he had spent hundreds of hours hitting knuckleballs. He knew how to adjust his stance to have a better chance of connecting with the erratic pitches that tended to drive just as they crossed the plate. Now, because he just knew the guy was going to throw a knuckleball, Kane shifted his feet and the position of his arms. Stop that, Kane thought. Widen your stance. Get ready to rock and roll. He's going to throw heat. He is not, Kane argued with himself. Actually, he was arguing with Monty. Kane raised a hand and stepped out of the batter's box. Sorry, he said to the UMP. The UMP straightened. He gave Kane a hard look. Kane turned away from the UMP and muttered under his breath. Not now. He couldn't have a face-off with the Gator AI while he was at bat. A fastball's coming, Kane's inner Monty thought, and fastballs are fun to hit. Kane knew Monty was wrong about what the pitcher was going to throw, and who cared what kind of pitch was more fun to hit. Kane needed to make a contact with the ball, fun or not. He had to set up for a knuckleball. In spite of his intention, when Kane stepped back onto the position of the plane, his arms and legs moved into the fastball ready position. He didn't want them in that position, but that's where they were. He only throws 1 or 2 knuckleballs a game, Monty thought. He's already thrown 3. No way he's going a dumb old knuckleball. But that's what the pitcher was going to throw. Kane knew it. He could feel it. Unfortunately, he was right. Being right didn't do him any good, though, because his arms and legs had refused to prepare for knuckleball. They'd been ready for a fast ball. So, of course, the knuckleball got past him. Strike 3. The umpire, okay, shouted with an over-exaggerated fist jab aimed in Kane's direction. The other team erupted from their dugout. The home fan cheered, and angry and frightened by his inability to make his body do what he'd wanted to, Kane threw his bat and stomped away from the plate. Told you so, he muttered, as he retrieved his bat and jogged with his head down towards the dugout. Before Monty had commandeered Kane's arms and legs at the baseball game, The only thing Monty had done besides intrude into Kane's thoughts was make Kane suggest cream for Sienna's pimple. Kane, of course, was nearly unglued by the realization that he had an AI gator in his head. But he'd rationalized that Monty's thoughts and occasional insertions were those thoughts into Kane's speech. It wasn't the total end of the world. It was bad, yes. Very, very bad. And Kane didn't know what he was going to do about it. But he figured he could handle it. For the most part, even though Monty was in his head, Kane was the dominant presence in his mind. After the game, however, Kane had come to grips with the terror of knowing Monty could take over his body at will. Kane sure as heck couldn't tell anyone about it. The reception his essay had gotten had been bad enough. If he'd started talking about an animatronic AI in his head, he'd be instituted for sure. He just had to hope that Monty would remain content with a backseat position. On Monday at lunch, Kane was distracted as he stepped out to the buffet line in the school cafeteria. It was hard not to be distracted when you shared your thoughts with a mischievous gator. Some things he could do without concentration, though, and picked out what he was going to eat was one of those things. The cafeteria was already packed when Kane took his place in line because he'd gotten hung up in the restroom after class. In the restroom, Kane had done his thing and was at the sink washing his hands when Gerald, the class nerd, had walked in. Be fun to stick his head in the toilet, Kane had thought when he saw Gerald. As soon as he'd had the thought, Kane had shaken his hands. He pressed his lips together and concentrated on lathering his hands. Hi, Kane, Gerald said. Kane hadn't trusted himself to open his mouth. Having a nerd for a little brother, Kane had nothing against Gerald. And because other kids were mean to the poor guy, Kane went out of his way to be nice to him. Monty, however, had other ideas. Where'd he get that nose? Kane, Monty, thought. It looks like someone glued a potato on his face. Used to Kane's friendliness, Gerald had frowned when Kane didn't speak. Kane had tried a smile, but as he started to stretch his lips into a grin, his tongue attempted to poke its way out. Kane immediately clenched his teeth so his tongue wouldn't escape. Monty was trying to stick Kane's tongue out at Gerald. Did you see the meteor shower last night? Gerald asked, hovering near the sinks. A couple of sophomores came in, arguing about a movie they'd just seen. They ignored Kane and Gerald. Is that how this little guy got to Earth? Kane thought. He rode down on a meteor. Kane heard roaring laughter in his head. Frowning, he managed to nod and answer to Gerald's question. By now, Kane had finished washing his hands. He'd started to pull his hands out from under the water, but his hands didn't want to come out. They were trying to cup water as if they intended to throw water at Gerald. Cut it out, Kane snapped. Gerald's already bulgy eyes expanded even farther. His face started to screw up like he was going to cry. Not you, I managed to say over the top of his thoughts. Cry, baby, cry, baby. I was talking to myself, Kane said. This was true, in a way. No, it was true. Just flat out, right? Lie, 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 Kane thought. Sorry, Kane said as he started to hurry past Gerald. I have a lot of my mind. A lot on my mind. Yes, that's a very good description, I guess. Not daring to look at Gerald again, Kane had torn out of the restroom. Once through the door, he had leaned back against the wall. Ignoring the looks he'd gotten from the two giggling freshman girls, he'd run a hand through his hair and muttered, "Get a grip." Kane lifted a hand to wave at his teammates, who were settled around their usual table in the cafeteria. Kane moved his tray along the line inhaling the jumbling smells of chili, hot dogs, spinach, and spaghetti. He thought, now there's some great ammo for a food fight. Don't even think about it, Kane mumbled. Thankfully, even though Kane was only a couple feet from the brown-haired junior girl in front of him and the two freshman boys behind him, the rumble of conversation, the clinks and clunks of plates and cutlery, and the pulsing pop music coming from the overhead speakers drowning out his comments. Thinking he had himself under control, Kane started to choose a green salad from the food tray in the cafeteria buffet. When Kane almost had his hand on the large plate of greens, the hand veered away from the greens and grabbed the bowl of cherry jelly-o. As soon as he grabbed the jelly-o, Kane let go. The ball dropped back to the bed of ice it had sat on. Kane attempted to go for the green salad again, but his right hand headed back towards the jelly-o. Frowning, Kane lifted his left hand and got the salad he wanted. At the same time, his right hand grabbed the jelly-o. Kane put the green salad on his tray. He tried to get his right hand to put down the jelly-o. His hand wouldn't cooperate. Because Kane didn't want the jelly-o, he managed to prevent his hand from putting it on the tray, but he couldn't stop it. When his right hand suddenly lifted the bowl and flung the jelly-o into his face. Stunned, Kane immediately looked around to see if anyone had seen what had happened. Unfortunately, 3 girls at the table closest to the food line had seen it. All 3 widened their eyes at him. Yeah, it's probably a very, very odd sight. But none of them spoke. Kane recognized the girls. They were sophomores. One of them had a brother on the baseball team, and all 3 of them came to the games, so they knew who he was. There was a hierarchy in high school, and Kane was at the top of it. Even when he did nothing weird, kids on the lower rungs of the ladder weren't going to call him out on it. You think? He thought. What if you did this? Before he could get himself under control, Kane's right hand flipped the green salad up from his tray, flinging lettuce all over his shirt. That must be so weird to see. Just a dude throwing food at himself. As the lettuce scattered, Kane's right hand reached for a bowl of macaroni salad. Even though he tried to grab the salad with his left hand, Kane's right hand managed to lift the bowl and upturned the salad onto the top of his head. Kane could hear riotous laughter in his head. Points for me, he thought. Kane tried to get a hold of his right wrist with his left hand, but he was too fast for himself. His right hand evaded his left, and he found himself lurching down the food line, shoving his tray along the stainless steel shelf as he went. Before he could stop himself, Kane picked up the ladle that rested on a big pot of chili. The ladle, filled with chili, lifted upward. The spicy scent of jalapenos and chili powder assaulted Kane's nostrils. Kane squinted at his right hand, and he shot out with his left hand to grip the ladle's hand. For several seconds, his right and left hand fought over the ladle. Chili squirmed onto his tray and churned and splashed onto the floor. Just what do you think you're doing, young man? A woman's shrill voice cried out. Kane looked up from the ladle. His gaze landed on the small, intense eyes of one of the cafeteria workers, Miss Patel, a dark-haired woman with severe frown lines and thin lips. Miss Patel stood behind the food in front of Kane, her hairnet cut into the flesh of her forehead, making her skin bulge above the scrunched-up brows. Kane dropped the ladle. Chili slopped over a pan of tamales next to the chili pot. I win. His thoughts chortled. Kane looked at Miss Patel. I'm really sorry, Miss Patel. I'll clean up this mess. Kane glanced around. The 3 girls weren't the only one staring at him. Now, dozens of pairs of eyes were directed his way, including those of his teammates, those of Sienna and her friends, who were sitting at the table near Kane's teammates. Kane, his face sticky with Jelly-O, his shirt covered with lettuce and chili stains, and his hair gooey with macaroni salad, threw up his hands and gave everyone his best cocky grin. "Sorry, everyone," he called out. "Social experiment. An assignment. Go on back to what you were doing." I don't think that's gonna work. We'll see. "Give him a 5, Kane thought. "Good one." Kane blocked out his thoughts as he grabbed a bunch of napkins. He started to bend over to clean up the mess he'd made. "Leave it," Miss Patel said. "I'll get it." She shook her head and muttered, "Strange teachers. Social experiment. My patootie." "Thanks, Miss Patel," Kane said as he deposited his tray at the dirty dishes area. "What about eats?" he thought. "I'm hungry." "Tough," he muttered as he turned and strode out of the cafeteria. No way he was going to risk another one-man food fight. Yeah, that's rough. At practice that afternoon, Kane took some good-natured ribbing about his social experiment, fighting urges to hawk loogies and kick dirt at his friends. Come on, let's have some fun." Kane managed to keep up the charade that he'd been throwing around his food to see what people would do. "What was the point of the experiment?" Tank, the team's right fielder, asked. He rolled up his sleeve over a bulging bicep before he took a few practice swings. "To see if I could start a food fight by tossing around a little food," Ken said, thinking fast. "At yourself?" Lewis asked, who was warming up nearby, firing fastballs at Jimmy, the team's catcher. "That's pretty tame, if you ask me." Kane shrugged. "Yeah, I didn't get to do what I wanted to do." Before the conversation continued, Kane started doing wild wind sprints, okay? He had to get away from his friends because he hadn't been the one speaking just then. Monty was the one who said he didn't get to do what he wanted to do. Monty had wanted a full-on food fight. "You're no fun at all, Kane," Monty thought. And in the middle of the second wind sprint, Kane did a somersault. Not because he wanted to. From that point on, Kane had to concentrate on every move he made. Rigid focus was the only way to keep Monty under control. Yeah, it seems like it's getting worse, which is weird because the effect should, like, the machine is broken now, right? So the effect should diminish if it's an effect. Now, if Monty's AI was actually copied into Kane's psyche, then I guess, yeah, that's I guess it makes sense that it would grow then, because Kane is like 18, right? Or maybe 17, I don't know. So his brain would still be developing. So would also the AI within, right? I guess it makes sense that Monty would get stronger, especially if he can somehow influence, like, grow stronger, root himself further in the brain, get more control and all that, as we see. Yeah, a bad situation for Kane here. And I don't see a way to undo that. So I'm gonna guess there's gonna be a bad ending here. We'll see. That afternoon after practice, Kane went to the school's shop so he could finish up his project. Because Sienna still wasn't talking to him, he wanted to complete what he was working on so he could give it to her and hopefully get her to forgive him. He also wanted to do something to get his mind off what was happening to him. When Kane pushed through the double doors to the school's workshop, he found it empty. It was fine with him. He was still embarrassed by what Monty, had done in the cafeteria. After all, it was getting harder and harder to interact with other people because Monty kept butting in, usually just with snide judgments in Kane's head, but sometimes forcing Kane to blurt out things he didn't want to say. So far, none of the things were as bad as what he said to Sienna, but he hadn't gotten his share of raised eyebrows and rolled eyes. Or he had gotten his share of raised eyebrows and rolled eyes. Kane let the metal doors fall close behind him as he strode past the massive self-feeding table saw. A table saw. I don't like the set dressing, I gotta say. We'll see. By far the biggest tool in the place, the saw had 12 feet of spinning metal rollers that carried long pieces of wood to the saw's blade to be ripped lengthwise. A sheet of plywood lay on the roller. Kane could tell by its sweet, almost wintergreen-like scent that it was birch. He idly wondered who'd left it here. The shop's room was shaped like an inverted T. The horizontal part of the upside-down T extended both ways from the doors containing the shop's large power tools, the radial arm saws, band saws, table saws, and table routers, drill presses, and planners. Behind those tools, the vertical part of the T contained the work tables. The shop's walls were lined with storage shelves and cabinets. Some of the cabinets were used to store students' ongoing projects. The rest were packed full of tools and woodworking supplies. The shop was stocked with every hand tool imaginable, a vast array of clamps, shelf after shelf of glues, stains, and paints, in all shapes and sizes of nails, screws, and other connectors. When Kane had first signed up for shop class, he and his fellow newbies had been told that the shop was the finest school shop in the country because a rich alumni had gifted the school with all the amazing tools it contained. Kane hadn't realized just how necessary all these tools were at the time, but he'd come to realize how lucky he was to learn woodworking in this shop. Yeah, sounds like a well-equipped shop there. Kane reached the work table he usually used, and he retrieved his partly completed project from the cabinet behind him, ran a hand over the cutting board, and appreciated the smooth feel of the perfectly sanded wood. Looking good, Kane thought. He wasn't sure if that thought was his or Monty's. He had found that they did sometimes agree on things. That's interesting. Kane was making a cutting board for Sienna, who lately was really interested in cooking. He'd already done a lot of work. He'd painstakingly cut pine strips, glued them together, and sanded them smooth. Kane planned to cut the glued together pieces into a sloth shape, making it probably the world's only hanging sloth cutting board. Yeah, I guess. I've never seen that before. Grabbing a cordless jigsaw, Kane positioned the saw's thin blades at the middle of the cloth's rounded back, and he gripped the saw's handle with his right hand. I'm sorry. Why are you sawing after you already sanded? Shouldn't you have done that afterwards? Well, maybe to get it level. I don't know. Kane moved his thumb, intending to start the saw. Before he could depress the switch, however, he picked up the saw and moved it to the outer edge of the glued together boards. When Kane's thumb turned on the saw turned, cutting zigzags along the edges of the board. But that wasn't what Kane wanted. He wanted to start the cut next to the template, so he tried to move the saw to the right place. The saw wouldn't move. It wouldn't have moved because his hand wouldn't make it move. Gloves are boring, he thought. A sound would be more fun. Oh no, you don't, Kane said. The jigsaw rhythmically humming away, was continuing to huzz along the edge of the woods, making little triangles. Cain gritted his teeth and used every ounce of his will and strength to jerk the saw inwardly, away from the edge of the towards his temple. As soon as he moved the saw in that direction, though, it started to pull back towards the edge again. "Stop!" Cain snapped. He put his hand over his right hand and he bore down, struggling to get the saw to stay near the template. But the saw jerked backward again. Cain tugged, and the saw veered towards the template once again. Its blade still powering up and down, the saw began to careen all over the surface of the glued-together boards. Cain grunted and struggled to control the saw, but he ended up overcorrecting, and the saw powered right through the middle of the slab template. Cain and Monty were locked in a battle over the cutting board, and neither of them were winning. But the big loser? The big loser was the cutting board. Cain could do nothing but continue to fight to gain control over his body while he watched all the work he'd done to get chewed to bits by the jigsaw. Since neither of his hands could manage the jigsaw, it seemed to develop a mind of its own, and it just carved up the wood at random. He had to turn the saw off. He had to wrestle with his own hand to do it. But Cain finally was able to turn off the saw. When it was silent, he set it down and stared at the pile of wood, shards and sawdust that was supposed to have been Sienna's love cutting board. The next morning, Cain woke up 20 minutes before his alarm was set to go off. This was very weird, but no weirder than sharing brain space with an animatronic gator. "Get out of bed, sleepyhead," the now all too familiar inner voice sing-songed in Cain's head. "Let's rock and roll," Cain groaned. He'd put his pillow over his face. "Potty pooper," he thought. Cain threw the pillow across the room. Fighting despondency, Cain reached out and picked up his phone from his nightstand. He sat up, but put his feet on the floor and called Sienna, as he had previously 50 times. He'd called over the last few days. He got her voicemail. "Listen, Sienna," Cain said into his phone. "I wish I could explain to you what's going on with me, but because something is going on. I don't know how to say it. I've been saying things I don't mean, and Cain managed to get his thumb on the red end call button on this phone just in time as his mouth finished. "Think you're stuck up for getting so bent out of shape about one little comment about your huge Sid. Forget her. Let's have some fun," Cain thought. No, not Cain. Monty. "Oh, come on," Cain thought. "Get in the game. Offer to buy her cream for his big Sid was funny." But that wasn't what Cain really thought. Or was it? Cain was starting to wonder which thoughts were his own and which were Monty's. What would happen if Monty took over even more? Disgusted and discouraged, Cain stood and headed into the bathroom. He didn't know what else to do except try to stick to his regular routine. It was either that or give up and possibly turn into Monty. Plus, part of him was holding out hope that if he kept trying to ignore Monty, part of his brain, the AI, would get frustrated and crash or something. But going back to the Pizzaplex didn't cross his mind at all, because this didn't happen the first time when the game ended normally, right? It only happened after he broke it. Cain took a shower, got out, wrapped a towel around his waist. He stepped over to his sink, ignoring his wet hair. He reached into the drawer in his cabinet under the sink. There, he kept his hair products, his razor, his scissors. He grabbed his razor and quickly shaved. Then he started to reach for his blow dryer. His right hand froze before he could grab it. A blow Blow out is girly, he thought. A mohawk would be more fun. Before he could stop it, Kane's right hand went into the drawer and grabbed his razor again. Kane immediately knocked the razor from his right hand with his left hand. Not the hair, Kane said. He looked at himself in the mirror, squinting. He leaned forward. I knew you in there, he said, but you're not in command. I am, well, I'd argue, but okay. Against his will, Kane leaned towards the mirror. The right side of his mouth worked up into a snotty grin. You're in trouble now, he thought. Kane's right hand shot into the drawer and grabbed the razor again. He lifted the razor and moved the razor towards the side of his head. The razor was almost touching Kane's hair when his left hand reached up and slapped the razor away. The razor rocketed across the bathroom and hit the travertine tile near the shower with a tinkle. It hit the floor, tappity-tap, and spun in a circle. Kane again tried to pick up his blow dryer, and again his right hand wouldn't cooperate. He rolled his eyes and grabbed the blow dryer with his left hand. Thinking he'd won the battle, Kane didn't realize what his right hand was doing, until a pair of scissors appeared in his field of vision. The scissors opened and headed towards the long waves of hair on top of his head. Hey, Kane shouted. He dropped the blow dryer and lifted the left hand to grab the scissors. As Kane's left hand attempted to wrest the scissors from his right hand turned the scissors. It slashed one blade of the open scissors across Kane's left palm, ultimately driving the point into the meaty part of the palm under Kane's thumb. Kane gasped and yanked his left hand back. The scissors stuck in his flesh for a second, then dropped away and clattered into the sink. Blood poured from the gash in his palm. Kane didn't make it to school that day until after lunch. He spent the entire morning in the ER, waiting to get his hand stitched up. Surprisingly, though, the afternoon passed uneventfully. For nearly 4 hours, all through the rest of the day's classes and through baseball practice, Kane had insisted on practice, even though using his left hand hurt like heck. Kane hadn't heard a peep out of Monty. Kane's thoughts were finally his own. His words were his own, his actions were his own. Maybe something about the injury had thrown Monty out. Oh, don't get any stupid ideas, please. Kane thought as he cleaned up after practice. And that was his own thought. He'd never been so relieved. But didn't he say he had trouble concerning his own thoughts from Monty's? I don't know. After practice, Kane started to head towards his car. His hand was throbbing, and all he wanted to do was go home, lie down, and forget the last few days. So why was he walking down the hallway in the opposite direction from the parking lot? Kane was so distracted by the pain in his hand and the euphoria of thinking his problem was over that he was halfway down the beige-tiled, locker-lined hallway before he realized that his feet were taking him someplace his conscience had no intention of going. As soon as he caught on to what was happening, Kane tried to stop his feet, but his feet kept going. What are you doing? Kane asked aloud. One of the artsy kids in his class, Rowan, whose coal-lined eyes made him resemble a zombie, was standing at his locker. He turned and leveled his hollow-looking gaze at Kane. What's it to you? Rowan challenged. Kane wanted to explain that he hadn't been talking to Rowan, but his mouth wouldn't open. His feet kept moving, and he walked past Rowan without saying a word. Rowan shrugged as Kane went by. Whatever, Rowan muttered. When Kane thought he was out of Rowan's earshot, he whispered, What are you doing? He was talking to Monty. Because clearly Monty was the one moving Kane's feet. Monty wasn't gone after all. Monty was the one taking Kane to the school's shop. You mean the school's shop with a giant table saw? Oh no, that was foreshadowed. No, surely no, right? Oh well. Kane pushed open the double doors to the shop. It was empty. That's bad. Why are we here? Kane asked. Moving forward without any desire to do so, Monty remained silent. Kane turned and walked towards the self-feeding table saw. Frowning, he reached the end of it, and he levered himself up so he was seated on the plywood that still lay on the metal rollers. What are we doing here? Kane heard the panic that tinged his words. Kane concentrated and tried to push himself off the plywood. Instead of lifting him up and away from the saw, one of the hands gripped the plywood and the other one reached out and flipped the switch to power on the saw. A high-pitched whine filled the room, and the saw blade buzzed into motion. The metallic screeching roared, filled Kane's head. The saw's sound, though, wasn't loud enough to silence Kane's, no, Monty's thoughts. I've tried to play along with you, but you're no fun. You need to go away. What do you mean? Kane shouted, concentrating on regaining control of his muscles. Kane grunted with the strain of attempting to push himself off the flat expanse of birch, but again, his body did the opposite of what he wanted. He laid back on the plywood. As soon as Kane was in the prone position, the plywood started to move along the metal rollers. Kane, able to control his head just enough to crane his neck to the left, looked back at the saw's huge spinning blade. He saw the saw's shrill keen filled his head as his heart began to pound as fast as the saw was whirling. Stop! Kane screamed. The plywood kept moving toward the saw. It carried Kane with it. Kane said, "No!" he screeched as his head moved closer and closer to the saw blade. Kane strained to keep his gaze on the whirling metal, jagged-edged disc. He could see that the saw was positioned so it would cut through the center of his head. If he couldn't get control of his body and get off the plywood, if he remained there where he was, the saw blade would slice right through the crown and bisect his skull, severing his corpus callosum. The saw's going to cut my brain apart, Kane thought, and the rest of me too. Kane felt the blade cut into his skin. He howled as the saw buzzed relentlessly, preparing to carve into Kane's skull. His thoughts a chaos of pain and horror. Kane could do nothing to save himself. The table shook violently as the saw struck bone. Rock and roll. And that's the end of the Monty Within. Quite a story, I would say. They're really leaning into this AI thing, the kind of help wanted thing, where a virus and an AI takes over the human's mind, right, and controls them somehow. I don't know if the story tells us anything specifically, though. We already knew that was possible from like the scanned circuit boards from the help wanted emails or whatever it was. Or was it the AR emails that was about that? I'm not sure. Anyway, what is weird though is that Monty would kill his own host just because it wasn't fun. Because if the host is dead, then Monty would also not be able to live anymore. live, I don't know, do whatever you want to do. Rock and roll, I guess. Kind of weird that he would choose this. Anyway, that's it for the story. I'll see when I get to read the next story, the last story of the Tiger Rock book, which is called Bleeding Heart. Wonder what that is about. No idea. Gonna be interesting, I guess. Anyway, bye.